Hello and welcome to the Practical Animal channel. The channel is for you if you want to know what it takes to work with animals. By working with animals, I mean as a job which pays the bills, not as a volunteer. Of course, to get your dream job working with a wild animal, you will need voluntary experience. But the advice in these videos is intended to give you the insight needed to take the next step in your journey, taking you beyond voluntary work. The next question is, maybe you want to know if you need a degree to work with animals. Maybe you want to work with domestic animals. That could be with farm animals or companion animals like dogs and cats. Alternatively, maybe you want to work with wildlife in captivity at a zoo or biodiversity venue. Or maybe you want to work with wildlife in the wild, such as by being a field scientist. To be blunt, maybe you don't want to work with live animals at all, but instead want to work with dead ones, such as by being a trapper in the North American backwoods, or as a taxidermist, or meat inspector in the food industry. Whatever animal job appeals to you, we aim to cover it all. We do this by interviewing an animal industry professional every week. I ask him or her what the essential know-how is for working with a given type of animal. My name is John Beaumont and I have a background in field biology, habitat management, conservation biology and also veterinary medicine. I have been a conservationist in Mauritius, Israel, Seychelles, Malaysia and Brazil. It means I can ask the questions that give the answers you need to know. This week, my guest is Dr Oliver Metcalf, a Postgraduate Research Associate at the Manchester Metropolitan University in England. Dr Metcalf has a PhD in bird bioacoustics. He carried out fieldwork in the Brazilian Amazon. I began by asking him to describe how his career as a birdwatcher developed.
I guess it started with bird watching. Maybe even further back, just walking around as a kid with my parents, being a bit bored, and watching birds, and then a love of bird watching growing from that. Sort of a bit of a jump at the age of 13, and I don't really know how this came about, but I went on a young birders trip, sort of organised by the Young Ornithologist Club, the RSPB thing, back at whatever it was called back in the day. It was a weekend down at Sandwich Bay for teenagers to go to. I think I was the youngest there by a couple of years. But it was great. We had a great time. I was there for 3 days, saw loads of birds, like 110 species or something. And at the time, I had a tiny pair of Pentax binoculars, no idea what I was doing, but got really hooked. So came back, bought a proper pair of binoculars. 6 months later, bought a telescope. Spent the next 3 years, most evenings on Staines reservoirs, cycling distance from my house, bird watching every day, properly hooked, properly just completely into it. Learned everything I could about birds for 3 or 4 years. But at school, I was kind of like dual lives. So at school, I was good at humanities. So all the essay subjects and that sort of stuff. So I never really did the science subjects. So I did history, politics, English lit as A level. I did a biology AS level and dropped it at AS level. And then went into university. I did a philosophy and politics degree at York, so completely unrelated, and sort of had a very fun undergraduate first year, freshers year, but didn't do too much birding. And then the second year moved out, bought a car for £400 and was in York and got out into the countryside. I was like, it's amazing. There's so many different birds around, like yellowhammers and greenfinches you just didn't see in the suburbs of London. Got really back into it, really keen, and just started to know the local birding community around York, met most of the people that were keen birders and that sort of thing. So when it came to graduating, I don't know how conscious it was really. I wanted a job. I don't know if I really thought that I wanted to move away from philosophy and politics, or whether it was just the guy that I met down Birdhide, who happened to work for an energy consultancy, was desperate for an ornithologist to come on board, and he offered me a job. So I started doing that a month before I graduated. Whilst I was still doing exams, I started working full time at this at Arcus Consulting, doing bird surveys for slightly over minimum wage, but only slightly. Doing bird surveys most days, you know, straight in the May survey season. So I was getting up at 3 a.m. 3 or 4 times a week, going out doing 7 or 8 hour surveys, driving 2 or 3 hours here or there, all over the country. Doing then the days back in the office, filing maps, doing data entry, that sort of stuff, real dog's body stuff, phoning around landowners. So I did that for 3 years. And then a lot of my friends were doing the field work, but they're doing it freelance and being paid quite a lot more. So I asked for a pay rise and they said no. So I quit and went freelance. So I did that for 3 years freelance. And that was fantastic. I loved that for a year and a half. It was absolutely amazing. Going all over the place, loads and loads of birding. And then David Cameron made his policy changes and basically ended onshore wind development in 2014, 2015, something like that. So all the work changed from doing bird surveys, pre and post monitoring for wind farms, to sort of ecological clerk of work stuff on wind farm sites, which was a lot less fun, handling construction workers and that sort of stuff. I didn't enjoy that at all. And it was long periods away from home, working in Galloway a lot of the time. So, and it was also a bit brain dead. I was getting a bit fed up of just sitting in one place for 6 hours and not really thinking about stuff. So I decided I wanted to get back into academia, and applied for a conservation science course at Imperial University. Unfortunately, the people that ran that course were very open-minded about academic backgrounds and accepted a bit of life experience over not having a biology degree or a conservation degree or typical undergrad routes. So they took me on. I had a brilliant year doing that. I was really fantastic. And then in March, whilst I was doing that, my current boss, Alex Lees, got some funding. He was advertising for a PhD using acoustics to monitor wildlife in the Amazon. And I knew I wanted to use acoustics. I had a master's project lined up in New Zealand for a month to go and monitor some birds out there. So I thought, I don't really know if I want to do a PhD, but I reckon I could maybe get this. So it's worth applying for and then make a decision if it happens. So I applied for it. I interviewed for it. Alex rang me up 3 days later and said, you can have it if you want it, but you've got to let me know in the next day. I was like, oh God, I don't know. I hadn't done the thought about it yet. I only told my partner, my girlfriend, that I'd applied for, she'd moved down to London with me to do my master's. And then I was this PhD in Manchester. I'd only told her the day before I went for the interview that I'd even applied for it. So I was like, I had to ring Kat up and was like, by the way, I might be moving back to Manchester. What do you think? I need time to think about it. It's like, well, I don't have time to think about it. So that happened anyway. So then I did, a 3.5 year PhD, of which I spent about 15 weeks in Brazil, 12 weeks in the Amazon, which was amazing. And then Alex is a brilliant supervisor and organised it. So there was a pot of money left at the end so I could carry on as a postdoc for an extra 18 months. So that's where I am now. I'm 6 months into that.
Ollie, what has been your proudest moment working with birds?
I think that's definitely finishing my PhD. I think it's astonishingly hard. I think going into a PhD, you always think it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but I didn't realize how difficult it really is. And I completely understand why so many people have mental problems and difficulties during it's a very, very long period of time where you're almost entirely self-motivated. There's not really, you can break it down as different goals, but they don't really make any sense. You just have this protracted slog to get to an endpoint that's not in sight up to the point that it's way too close. So you go from, I've got very little motivation to, oh my God, I can never finish this. It's a really hard thing to do. So I'm pretty pleased with myself for having got through that.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Ollie, people say that to get a PhD, you're actually adding to knowledge. You're making new science. Is it possible to summarize what the new science was that you added to ornithology?
Sure. So I guess my academic work has been pretty focused on the acoustic side of things. So how we can use sound to monitor diversity in particular. So this is relatively new in academia. So bioacoustics is a field that's been around for quite a long time, but that's generally studying sound and how birds communicate or animals communicate with each other, less about how we can use their sounds and vocalizations to understand their ecology. So there's sort of a dearth of methods and analytical tools to actually make use of it. So there's been an increase in hardware. There's some amazing hardware relatively cheap out there now, so that doesn't need looking at. And there's all sorts of stuff I'm not good at. So like really deep learning side of things, really technical side of designing these algorithms to recognize species and do the machine learning statistical stuff, which isn't me, coming from a philosophy and politics background. I don't have that background. But what I do have is a pretty good understanding of how birds behave and what they do and where they are in the environment, which is actually often really useful for making sense of, if you know a bird's vocalize, what does that mean? That next step of carrying on. So actually what I've been doing is quite a lot of developing methods from how we can take, I have sort of 12 terabytes of sound files on my hard drive, how we can take that sound and turn it from sound to ones and zeros for presence and absence. This species is here, but it's not here, it's not there. And then what does that mean on a larger scale? So that's what I've been doing quite a lot of. And in my case, particularly focused on forest degradation in Brazil. So logging and fires in the Amazon. We've got different areas of forest that have been differently affected. So how can we use sound to tell us how birds are affected by those things?
How were they affected?
So it's different for different groups. So the diurnal species, the daytime species, forest specialists decline, absolutely decline. They can't cope. So there's some real specialist species in Amazonia. There's a species of ant wren that will only look for insects within one species of dead leaf that's on the forest floor that curls in a certain way, and they're so specialized they'll only forage in those for insects. If logging or fire goes through, that tree no longer exists, that species just collapses. It's no longer there. And there's a number of species that are like that. There's a number of species that just can't cope with light as the canopy opens up, can't cope with light and temperature. So they'll decline. But there's other species that will also, so should absolutely say that overall it's a very bad thing. But there are some species that will benefit from it. So generalist species that you wouldn't necessarily think of belonging to the Amazon rainforest. They're ones that exist in farmland or fields, open areas, can move in and start to make a home on the forest edges and that sort of thing. So you don't see just loss, you see some gain, but mostly loss. And the nocturnal species, so I was particularly looking at the nocturnal species because they're very hard to do, to study by going out and looking for them or counting them yourself. It's better to use the acoustic recordings. They actually seem to be one of the ones that do quite well from it. I think because the larger species we were studying are mostly insectivorous and quite generalist, having that bit of extra open space and the canopies allows more insects in, so they've got more food, is the theory. And possibly more broken branches means more nesting sites, potentially.
Ollie, you're a field biologist, a field naturalist. You are a tropical ecologist and a bird scientist, an ornithologist. You've done an awful lot, but can you perhaps paint a picture of what your typical working week is like at the moment?
At the moment, it's very boring. So it does vary quite a lot. I say it varies quite a lot. I'm almost always sat at my desk doing laptop work these days. It's the side effect of having 12 terabytes of sound data. There's not much call to get more. So this week I've been literally looking at spectrograms, which is a graph that represents sound. So you have frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and amplitude of the sound is represented in different colors, strength of color. And I've just been drawing boxes around where different species call, because that's what we're trying to build a deep learning algorithm. They need lots and lots of training data. So almost all of my week has been spent drawing boxes around grey blobs, which has not been phenomenally exciting. The week before, I was writing and editing a paper that I got back from, had been reviewed and got back with some corrections to do. Some weeks I do a lot of coding in either Python or R to try and develop the algorithms or do some statistical analysis. But yeah, that's pretty much me. It's not very much field work with work these days, unfortunately. So I do a lot of bunking off, but go birding. But yeah, there's not much time out in the field these days.
Which brings me nicely on to my next question. What's your biggest guilty pleasure at work?
Oh, well, yeah, okay. So yes, during lockdown, the first lockdown, I lived in a one bed basement flat in Moss Side in Manchester, and it drove me and my partner absolutely nuts. Couldn't really hack it at all. So between lockdowns, we took the opportunity to flee to the countryside. So I've moved to my friend's house in North Duffield because he's semi-deliberately, I think, stuck in Bali during the entire COVID period. So his house is empty. So we moved out into the North Yorkshire countryside, and we're between two national nature reserves, two absolutely stunning national nature reserves. So we often take an hour or two lunch break to go for a nice walk around, do a bit of bird watching, do a bit of walking. Perhaps longer than I should do, but I'm more productive afterwards, something like that.
What's your best bird fact, please?
I guess it's more of a story, but I quite like it. So on my site in Brazil, there's these amazing Brazilian birds called potoos, which are a bit like nightjars, sort of like upright nightjars, somewhere between a nightjar and an owl. They sit on posts absolutely still like this, just look up in the air during the daytime, and then at night they come out and catch insects, swoop around, perch hunting. There's a species called White-Winged Potoo that actually was described in 1912 off two 19th century specimens, and it went completely unseen. No one knew where it was at all until 1989, when it was rediscovered in Manaus, near Manaus, and then described in a paper in 1993. So it went missing for absolutely ages. No one could find it. But I have them on my site, which is really exciting. So yes, I guess that's my bird fact, that we've got these white-winged potoos that were missing for almost 100 years, and actually possibly aren't all that rare. You just need to listen to them with acoustics because they're hard to see, but possibly not actually all that rare.
And for anybody not in the know, Ollie, where is Manaus, please?
So it's not actually where I work, but it's relatively close on Brazilian scales, which is massive, but it's on the Amazon River. So it's pretty much the heart of Amazonia, really. It's the big city in the middle of the Brazilian Amazon.
The heart of darkness, perhaps.
That's Africa, isn't it?
Ollie, what are the skills, peak experiences, and personal qualities that have been key to your success as a bird scientist, an ornithologist?
Yeah, I don't know in terms of sort of innate skills. I'm not sure I'm making the most of any of them. Not making the most. I'm not sure I have any innate skills that are that useful for this job. I think being really, really interested in my job by being like massively into bird watching really helps. And that's the only thing that I think is absolutely vital for what I do, to see through all the stuff that's really quite hard, keep on persevering, is just absolutely loving wildlife and birds. Other than that, everything else I think I've picked up as I've gone along. I think it depends what you want to do, but in academia, you don't need to be good at maths. I'm terrible at maths and stats, but being able to code, do some basic coding, and being a problem solver are pretty vital, I think. But I think if you've got those things and a deep interest in your subject, you can learn everything else. we can learn coding. You just need to be a good problem solver and be very interested.
What books or people or conferences have most influenced your thinking, Ollie?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and it's a tricky one because I want to come up with something clever and like make me sound intelligent, but actually I think it comes, so again, it's a really boring birdie answer, but I've probably looked at the Collins Bird Guide more than anything else, any other book in the world. And I've got 3 copies still, because I won't throw away the one that's absolutely covered in mud, because I love having it out with me still. But yeah, I mean, it's changed my life. You know, you buy that book as a kid and looking through it and thinking, I'm never going to see all these birds. I'm never going to see all these birds, and they all look amazing. And just going back and looking at page after page, and then like the feeling of fulfillment as you start to see more and more of these species and understand more about them, and you're like, wow, okay, there's so much more to learn about these species in this couple of paragraphs of text. It's actually a massive part of my life, I think, just sort of growing from there and constantly going back to it still. And it's a very boring answer, isn't it? The standard guidebook to British birds, but yes, I think that.
I think that's great, actually. Personally, I absolutely love field guides. There's a lot of apps out there with people bringing out mobile phones into the field over the past 10, 15 years, but personally, I think you can't beat a good field guide. I love them.
Yeah.
Ollie, what is your view of ornithology as a career today?
I think it's hard. I don't think there's a good career to be had in ornithology necessarily. There is an academia, but the more academic you become, the more you go up the levels in academia, the less time you spend in the field, the less time you spend doing ornithology, the less time you even spend doing science. You know, you go a couple of levels up above where I am now, and you spend most of your time teaching, managing students, applying for grants, and getting other people to do all the fun stuff. I think you can make a career out of it as a consultant, but if you're freelance, then it's quite precarious. It's quite, I always struggle with the precarity of knowing whether you're going to get a next paycheck or not. Or you work for a company, and most of the companies are great, and most of the time the work you're doing is great, but there's always that thing of, am I going to go and end up surveying an oil pipeline and helping an oil pipeline be put in, which I was never that comfortable with. Or you work for an NGO, you know, the RSPB or similar, and the RSPB have actually done some good work with increasing their salaries, but frankly, the money is not going to be great. So I think it's a really difficult thing, and also it's a difficult thing to do, to spend. If you love birding, it's a really difficult thing to have as a career as well, without killing off your passion for it. I actually quite like now that I spend a bit more time behind my desk, because it makes it much more enjoyable when I go out and do it at the weekends for fun. Whereas when I was out all day, I might be out surveying some rubbish fields, but I still didn't feel like going somewhere better at the weekend necessarily. So I think for anyone thinking about getting into it, it's worth thinking really hard about whether it's better off as a hobby, go and earn a load of money doing something different and keep it as a hobby, or whether you really, really want to do that as a profession and all the sacrifices that requires. But I mean, I'm saying sacrifices. I have a great job and I love it.
Do you have to do teaching as part of your job?
I don't. I'm very well. Actually, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. I like doing research, and I like not having the time taken up to do the teaching. But when I've done bits of teaching, I've enjoyed it. But my contract at the moment doesn't include any teaching. I think if I was on campus every day, I'd be getting roped into it. So I'm just keeping my head down and trying to avoid going onto campus.
How do you see career opportunities in ornithology changing over the next 10 years, Ollie?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Academia seems to be imploding a little bit. So I don't know how that's going to work out. I guess a lot of the audience will have heard about the recent strikes, where massive pension cuts to a lot of academics, causing a lot of problems, and quite a lot of striking going on at the moment. So quite a lot of unhappiness there. and that's a serious problem, because actually, that alongside Brexit is going to cause considerable brain drain in the UK. I think it's not anywhere near as attractive as it was 5 years ago as a career. Again, severe funding cuts continuing for NGOs and stuff. So how well they manage to fund their roles going forward is questionable. And the continued threat of bonfire red tape, which essentially is, the consultant's job is to navigate red tape. That could go both ways. As we see increasing environmental crisis, they might take it more seriously and bring in more legislation. There might need to be a lot more people to actually survey and do that properly. Equally, they might just say it's not necessary to do all this stuff, and just throw wind turbines anywhere. I don't know how it's going to pan out.
For somebody watching this who is perhaps a school leaver, 16 years old, they've just got their GCSEs, what advice can you give somebody, or in fact somebody who wants a career change? What advice can you give somebody of that profile who wants to work with birds?
So I think spend your weekends birdwatching. And I think I it's all worked out very nicely for me, but I haven't done anything other than go birdwatching. And you just meet so many people. Once you know a basic amount of birding skill, birding lore, once you're the person that's in the hide every weekend that people start to recognize, there's such a community out there. It's an amazing community of birders that are very friendly. Everyone gets on very well. But you have to overcome that initial barrier of competence, I think, because there's so many people just coming and going. But once you're a solid birder, and I don't mean a brilliant birder, I don't mean an amazing birder that can identify everything. I just mean you can tell your blue tits from your great tits sort of thing, and you're showing effort. Then it's an amazing community that looks out for people, and people will find little bits of work here and there, or jobs and that sort of thing. Go and visit bird observatories, go to your local reserve. If you don't have a local reserve, get out and just do patchwork in your local park. Continue just bird watching as much as you can.
How important is it to have a degree, Ollie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unrealistic to say that it's not these days, if you want to be in ornithology. I think most of the jobs that you see require it, really. I don't know if my degree is completely irrelevant. So my undergrad degree is completely irrelevant. So actually what you learn on the degree is less important than having a piece of paper that says you've got a degree, which is a shame. But I think the reality is that you're not going to get many jobs in ornithology without having a degree.
What's the most endangered bird you've worked with, Ollie?
So I went to the Seychelles on my gap year, which was organised through the RSPB. They had a thing in their Young Birders magazine saying we wanted someone to go out there and volunteer for 3 months on Kuzan Island, which was amazing. I won that position, got offered that position for 3 months, and they had Seychelles Magpie Robins and Seychelles Warblers. And they were both under 200, population of 200 at the time. So yeah, they were pretty rare.
Did you get over to Arid?
No, we were on a speedboat off Arid for a little while, but I never actually set foot on it.
I looked after the Seychelles Magpie Robins on Arid.
Oh, cool, nice. Yeah, it's an amazing place to be.
Ollie, have you anything you'd like to add?
Oh, no, I probably did plan something for this, but I feel like I've talked about myself more than I've ever done in my life before. I don't think anyone wants to hear anymore.
Dr Oliver Metcalf, you're a research associate at the Manchester Metropolitan University. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal channel.
Thank you very much. Cheers, John.
I hope you enjoyed Dr Oliver Metcalf's account of his career as an academic and a birdwatcher. The take-home messages are several. To do a PhD on birds, you need to be highly self-motivated for several years. The idea of doing a PhD is that you add to knowledge. To be a birdwatcher, you have to have a knowledge of bird behaviour. And the essence of Oliver's work was, how can we turn bird sounds and presence or absence data from a habitat into meaning regarding habitat degradation, in this case rainforest. You need to be persistent and have a love for wildlife and birds. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful for explaining how to be a professional bird scientist, please consider clicking like. For more exclusive content on the skills needed to work with wildlife, their habitats and the animal industry, you are invited to subscribe to the channel. Next week on The Practical Animal, Jemima Parry-Jones returns once again to explain what happened when she went to America, events leading to the closure of her International Centre for Birds of Prey, and how being a published author, being awarded the MBE, and being CEO of her own zoo has helped her career. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video.